President Trump has a secret plan to create a sovereign wealth fund, and this plan will completely wipe out America's debt. It will make America wealthy. The government will invest in American businesses, and the business bros are all about this secret plan. So, in this episode, I'm going to break down what that secret plan is, how it works, and give you some real facts so that you can actually benefit if this does come to fruition. Let's go.
Noel. Yeah, she can fix that. You gotta get it done, no, you need to do it better. Well, she can fix that. Yeah, she can fix that. Investment to get back, trying to get a big stack. She can fix that. Let's fix that.
So let's get right into this. Donald Trump has a plan to create a sovereign wealth fund. And in this fund, it will actually invest in the stock market, essentially. It's a country's fund that they invest in. And other countries actually do have sovereign wealth funds where they have money that's set aside almost like an investment account, just like you or me might have with our IRA account or our 401 account. We put money in that account and we invest it into the stock market. We invest it into businesses. And it is supposed to grow the country's wealth and have investments available for businesses. So it could add a lot of money to companies in the United States where they could see large influxes of cash investment directly from the government. It could help the government actually reduce its debt. I'll talk about that in just a second. And it actually could create a situation where the economy is improved if this does come to fruition. However, America and the United States government already has a very, very large deficit. It has a large national debt. Let me break that down really quickly so you can understand how all of this works and where you could fit it. Currently, the United States has over $38 trillion in debt. Okay, we actually have borrowed this money, and our interest payments on that debt is our biggest expenditure. It's one of the biggest things that we spend money on. As the United States government, how the government works is it collects dollars from our taxes. We pay in our taxes. That is its income. That is how the United States government gets income and gets revenue through the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. Our tax dollars creates revenue. That is America's income. Then they take that income and just like you or I, they spend it on things that are needed, bridges, Congress, creating school, departments of education, the military. We know that the defense is probably one of the biggest expenditures. Obviously, it's actually second to the expenditure that I said on the interest payments that we are paying on our national debt. Because currently, we do not take in enough taxes, okay, enough income to cover all of our expenses, all of the spending that America does. Usually in a household, you have this amount of income, you have this amount of spending, and you have to make that work. Well, the United States government does not have that. Every single year, we run a deficit, meaning we do not have enough money, taxes collected to cover all of our expenses. So we borrow money. The United States government borrows money in order to meet the deficit. You get that. And that is how we get the national debt, which is now $38 trillion. So every president has said they are going to work on the deficit. In other words, try to get our spending in line with our tax revenue. That just has not happened. And in fact, with the one big beautiful bill, it has actually exceeded, is going to blow up the deficit because there was a big tax cut in that one big beautiful bill. So we're going to have even less revenue. But let's forget about that for now, because right now, again, this is about creating a sovereign wealth fund. Well, that is with excess money. But if I'm telling you currently we are in a situation where we don't even collect enough tax dollars to cover our spending, how on earth would we get a sovereign wealth fund? Because again, that's like extra money. That's a savings account. That's an investment account where you take extra money and then you invest. That's the idea. Well, let me tell you the secret plan that the business bros are all going crazy about. And so let me tell you my perspective. Right now, the United States government only has one source of revenue, tax dollars. We already know that. So one of the ideas was to create DOGE, D-O-G-E, the Department of Government Efficiency. You guys remember that big hoo-ha and how they were going to reduce America's spending. That was the idea, that they were going to reduce the expenses so that we are not running these deficits and we don't have to borrow money every single year in order to meet our budget. Well, we already know that DOGE was basically a fail. They were not able to find enough savings. They were not able to do enough layoffs. They were not able to cut enough government contracts in order to still meet the numbers. And in fact, the Doge check, the $2,000 check that, has been pitched by different, press releases have come out that they're going to be a $2,000 stimulus check directly from Doge. That may happen because, again, that is just taking from circa George W. Bush or even circa Obama, where they gave a stimulus check. Okay. The president of the United States can always send out a stimulus check. We already know they've sent them out before in the past. Here's some other ones. I'm going to put some actual articles and show you that we have done this in the past. And then, of course, the next year it counts as income, and the taxpayers, American citizens, then have to pay taxes on the stimulus check that was received. So definitely not a new idea, and something that could happen even though Doge was a fail and was not able to reduce spending enough. Because once they started doing the activities to reduce spending, it was very obvious what that was going to do to the economy. Let me explain that part. Doge quickly found out that cutting federal employees, cutting contracts has a negative impact on the economy. So many businesses in the United States rely on government spending. It is a fact. Government spending accounts for about 30% of so many companies' total revenue. And in fact, some companies 100% reliance on the government for their contracts, and canceling those contracts, especially a lot of those defense/military contracts, would devastate the entire economy. So Doge realized there is a multiplier effect, and the government spending does actually fuel American businesses. So cutting those contracts is a net negative. So now let's get to this secret plan, the sovereign wealth fund that Trump wants to create. A sovereign wealth fund would actually be a fund that is used for investments. Typically, the government would actually buy stocks in a company. Okay, they would actually go to publicly traded companies and literally buy stocks in those companies, and that would create an influx of cash to those companies. For example, if I had a publicly traded company, which I do not, and you bought my stocks, then that is actual liquidity and capital that I get to use and deploy in my business. I gave you a share, which is some equity of my business, and in return, I got that cash and I could actually grow my business. So the idea is investing in business where they would actually hire employees. Those employees would pay taxes. Those employees would buy stuff that would spur economic activity in the economy, and that would be a great multiplier effect. The company has more money, so then they could sell more stuff. That would increase the value of the company. The stock price would go up, and everything would be awesome. That is the idea behind this sovereign wealth plan and this secret plan. It would actually bring up companies. They would have that extra capital, and the government, because they own shares of that company, they have bought stocks in that company. They are now an investor in that company. So when the company's stock prices go up, the United States government will be a benefactor of that. Their stock will go, for example, they buy, say the government buys $100 million worth of stock at $100 per share, just using that as an example. And then they take that $100 million, that company is able to then 3x, 10x their revenue, hire more people. All of this great economic activity happens. And then the stock now is worth $300 per share. The government has actually benefited and made a profit off of that investment because it went from $100 a share to $300 per share in this hypothetical situation. So that would be this great benefit. And that is what is being sold to all the business bros by Donald Trump with this secret plan and this sovereign wealth fund. It will just change American economy. It will boost the economy up. Businesses would have capital. More employees will get hired. Just so many amazing benefits is what is being sold. Let me keep going though. Having these investments in the United States government would be an actual asset for the United States government. So right now we have a lot of debt. Okay, so just for example, if you as a person, you make $100,000 per year, but you have $500,000 in debt, you are not worth very much. You have a negative net worth. So right now, the United States government, for example, does have assets, and this would create more assets, which would offset all of that debt. And so if we could actually offset some of that debt, it would actually increase the value of the dollar and different things like that, because the country has less debt, less inflation, different things like that. They don't have to print as much money. That is the idea behind this. Now, Noel Randall has a master's degree from Penn State in economic development, and I can tell you unequivocally, not even like a PhD level person, there are some real flaws in that idea. Additionally, the government is now acting as a business, and that in itself is a flawed premise that the government can be a business and we can privatize everything, and that capital from the government, capital that we pay taxes, should be used and deployed into private corporations. Like, just so many negative consequences I could tell you that is just not being applied. And any economist would tell you this is probably not a viable plan overall, just because we don't actually have the money. Like I said, and I started this video, we are running a deficit. So where are we now getting this money to invest in these private corporations? We would actually have to raise taxes. We've already tried to reduce spending. It has negative economic consequences. We could raise taxes. That too would have negative economic consequences unless taxes were raised on the wealthy and corporations. We could talk about that. That's politically, something that is very divisive for people, but it is actually a viable idea if you are actually trying to increase revenue, which that does not seem to be the plan. They're not really trying to increase revenue. So let me tell you how all of this fits in and where you could really benefit. The government is talking about investing. A sovereign wealth fund is just the idea that we should be investing. And you personally, you should be investing. I have an opportunity where you can invest at noelleramsdell.com/invest. It is a fund called Golden Trinity where we buy up properties and we use them as short-term rentals. You could actually be a part of this for a very minimal investment. You don't have to deal with tenants. You don't have to deal with guests. You don't have to deal with any of the maintenance. You make an investment into this fund and you actually have access to the properties. It is such a win-win situation. And as our properties go up in value, you as an investor could be a benefactor of that. So those are investments that private individuals, companies, businesses should be making, not necessarily the government. However, the government does invest in businesses now, and they have taken bets and given millions of dollars to Tesla, for example, and Microsoft, and different companies have received quite a bit of money from the government, and the government has made direct investments into companies going back to even General Motors, where they bought tons of their stocks and they actually lost money on that investment, which brings me to my major point. Yes, this could go very well with his secret plan to wipe out the debt and have all this money, and the stock prices go up because the United States government is a benefactor of owning all of these stocks that go up in value, and they gave money to those companies, and then they were able to deploy that money and make more money. That is a business idea. That's not really a government idea. So it's a great idea for you to be listening to and taking action on yourself. You should be investing. You should be buying stocks. You should get real estate. You should have a business. But the government picking and choosing who they will invest money into, direct investments to those companies, that could get very, very problematic, especially if those investments don't work out. We have paid our tax dollars, for example, and we expect to get services from the government, Medicare and food stamps and bridges and engineering and military. Those are the things that the citizens of the United States have expected to get with their tax dollars. But if, for example, they invest in companies like General Motors and they give them an influx of money, and then the investment loses money, the stock prices go down and they sell them, like in the case where we did lose $10 billion investing in General Motors. Here's the article that shows you that right here, like this actually happened. That would be very problematic for United States citizens, and it would be giving the president and the government the idea of who is the winners, who are the actual winners, because they get the investments. Additionally, it would create just so much corruption. However, we as individuals, we earn money and then we invest our money. That is something that we should do. We create businesses and then we do government contracts. I have contracts with the government. Those are investments. Those are real things that we should be doing. The government actually creating a fund and then investing in companies, and they're picking which companies. We already know that's going to leave room for so much corruption, so many prejudices and different things like that. You guys get where I'm saying, where most of the money would end up going. And oh my gosh, I could just imagine how much corruption. That's all I'll say. Corruption, corruption, corruption is what I think this would lead to in our country. Additionally, that is deploying our tax dollars that we want for government services into the private sectors. And the business bros are raving about this secret plan, and they really want this because they think that they will then have an up on which stocks that they should invest in. And that is kind of true, but we actually can already do that. We can already see where our congressmen and our senators are investing and invest in those same companies. And there's already some level of corruption right there. If we took this to the next level and the government had a sovereign wealth fund and they could directly invest in those companies, and then everybody in the United States would say, okay, those are the companies I'm going to invest in as well. We have essentially just completely picked the winners. And it would be a direct, failure of competition altogether, because the government actually picked which company would win just by giving them an influx of all of that money. And then the United States citizens, we would follow along, and the business bros would follow along and just invest in those companies and kind of artificially prop up these companies, because now they have all of the money to buy out and acquire and merger other smaller companies. It would just create more of a wealth gap. And I personally think that this secret plan is not viable in that we don't have the revenue. So where would this revenue come from? As I said, we are running a deficit and we have to borrow money every single year. But this secret plan, the business bros, you guys know what I'm talking about. A lot of them are very, very hungry for this idea to happen so that they have an edge in the stock market. I definitely think we already have edges. You actually can invest in the stock market. I think you should also invest in Golden Trinity Real Estate Group. You can invest at noelrandall.com/invest. It's a small investment in real estate, so you actually have access to the properties. You yourself should be getting rental properties yourself. I think you should be buying real estate. I think you should invest in the stock market. And hopefully this idea and this secret plan doesn't really come to fruition. One more thing. Investing in real estate absolutely changed my life, and I think that it can change yours as well. Again, go to noelrandall.com/invest. Check out the investment that I've offered to you. See if you like it. Check it out, and you actually have access to the properties. Additionally, if you invest and you're one of our investors, we may be able to manage your property as well, and we are definitely stronger together. I think we should be investing in one another's companies. I think we should be servicing and patronizing each other's company. I think that we are stronger together. I think we are better off sharing this information and keeping together and not being distracted by the noise. I definitely think the sovereign wealth fund is not a great idea, but I definitely see that there are a lot of business bros pushing this. But I think that a better investment would be you investing in your real estate and investing in funds like the one that I had, that noelrandall.com/invest. Check it out. It's a small investment. And actually, like I said, you have access to the property. So you get to vacation in them. You get to come visit them. You can actually see what your investment was in. It is amazing. And that is the role that more of us should be taking, not just investing in funds, but creating your own funds too. So let's do this together. Why? Because I want to make sure that you have all of the knowledge, all of the resources, and all of the tools that you need to be successful. This is Noel, to your success. Hey, all right. Thank you for staying to the end. I really, really appreciate this. Since you stayed to the end, it must mean you love me. I love you too. So go ahead and subscribe and pass this video along to anyone that you think would find it valuable, because I gave you some real information that people just are not sharing. All right. See you next time.